Hello, everybody. I am absolutely honored, delighted, and probably more excited than I've ever been so far on this podcast because I get the opportunity to interview someone who I've been a big fan of for more than 20 years. Dr. Robert Cialdini is known as the godfather of influence. He's written two books, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, and Persuasion. He's written actually a number of other books as well. But those two books have sold more than 7 million copies and are available in something like 44 different languages. Dr. Cialdini is Regents Professor Emeritus at of Psychology and Marketing at Arizona State University. He holds multiple doctorates. And he really is he's the author of a book that I've given as a present to more people than any other book. He's the person that I've recommended this book to more people than any other book, and for two reasons. And just before I introduce Robert, I wanted to share with you the two main reasons. Number one, in the field of psychology, as a psychologist, it matters a lot to me that it's real research done, because so many people have ideas or intuitions or anecdotes that they use. Dr. Robert Cialdini has done the research for many, many, many years. And initially, the product of that research was the incredible book on the 6 principles of influence. And he since came back, first mentioned in Persuasion, with the 7th principle of unity, which again, he goes in depth on in this new book. But the first reason is because this is real research. If you want to know something works, this is where to go. And the second reason is I've met very few people in the world that have the same capacity and ability that Bob has to be able to translate that into something practical, something real. Personally, I want to say I've met Bob on a number of occasions. The first one, I'm sure you definitely won't remember this, but in London, you did a session, the late 90s or early 2000s. And I was at that session. It was a 2-day course that you did.
Oh,
And then I obviously met you when I did the Principles of Persuasion workshop, which is a phenomenal workshop, influenceatwork.com. Definitely recommended. And then I also did the Moment Maker workshop that followed up, and met you again there. So it's a real pleasure, and it's so nice to be here with you today. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on, Bob.
well, I'm glad to have the chance, Owen, to interact again.
So just to start off with, for those people out there that strangely don't know or haven't heard the million times I've referenced you, how did you get into? Actually, there's a really good question I do want to start with, and it's not something I've heard you answer before. So, what made you decide to study people in the first place? My understanding is your research wasn't always on people, like right at the very start. What made you switch? What gave you that? What experience made you decide, okay, I want to study the humans?
It was serendipity. It was luck, actually. Um, when I was an undergraduate, my research was always with a research professor of mine who studied animal behavior. And that's where I was going to go to graduate school, to study animal behavior, ethology, animals as they exist in their natural habitat. And I had never taken a social psychology course, but I had a mad crush on Marilyn Rapinski at the time, who was taking a social psychology course. And serendipity, there was an empty seat next to her. And we were at a place in our relationship, we wanted to be together all the time. So I filled that seat. And by the end of the term, I was more enamored of social psychology than of Maryland, as these things go, in university. So the information just set me afire. My mind was always thinking about the lectures and the research in the textbook and so on. I knew I had to shift my focus, shift my direction, and study human behavior as it naturally occurs.
Wow, I love it. I love it. I love the fact that love brought you to social psychology. It's a wonderful
Yes.
beginning. And so then what started you on the desire to learn about these 6 principles in the initial? What was that journey like?
Well, I was doing research on persuasion. It was always something that was interesting to me, partially because all my life I've been a sucker. I've always been a pushover for the appeals of various fundraisers or salespeople who've come to my door, and I would stand in kind of unwanted possession of these things. And it occurred to me that, oh, there must be a psychology to this, because it wasn't the merits of the offer that got me to say yes. It was the way the merits were presented to me that swept me along. And I always thought that was curious and intriguing. And so once I got into graduate school, I started working on attitude change, persuasion, social influence topics. And that was the kindling, really, for the fire when I started to study persuasion and persuasion science. Just as you said, it was the research process that really gave me confidence that what I was learning was something that I could take to the bank, something that was solid. It wasn't just an anecdote or some sort of hunch I had.
Brilliant. And so the principles of persuasion, or the principles of influence, are reciprocity, scarcity, social proof, liking, authority, a commitment to consistency. Is there a certain way that you categorize them in your mind? Is there a certain way that you think that people should look at them, like the way you organize those six principles? Again, before we touch on unity.
Yes, and this is thanks to my colleague Greg Neidert's uh, core motives model of social influence, where he says, um, when we send a message that's we hope will be successful, we really have three kinds of goals, three kinds of purposes that are different from one another. Very often at an early stage in our interaction with an audience or a recipient of our message, what we want to do is build the relationship. We want to create a sense of rapport and connection. Well, there are three of the principles that really gain traction right in that particular phase of the relationship. One is reciprocity, where we give something to someone and get something in return. And of course, that exchange initiates the relationship. Then there's the liking principle that says, well, people want to do business, want to be partners with, want to hang out with those people they like. And so that's another principle at the early stage that we want to be sure we would employ to the extent that that's available to us. And then finally, there's this newest principle, the seventh principle, which is unity, the extent to which we feel at one with that person. We feel that we share an identity with that individual. And that, of course, builds that sense of bonding and relationship that we're talking about. So those three principles are indispensable for using at the earlier stage. Once we've got that connection, though, one thing that helps get our message accepted is a principle of influence that we can employ that reduces our audience members' uncertainty about whether this is the right time for them to accept our idea, whether our idea is the right one for them, and so on. And there are two principles of influence that work especially well there. Because when we're uncertain, we don't look inside ourselves for answers. We look outside. And there are two primary places where we look. The first is to the voices of legitimate authority. What are the experts saying about this? If I know that, that allows me to reduce my uncertainty and feel that I can move forward now. The second place we look is to peers, people who are just like us, whose behavior also reduces our uncertainty that this is the right thing for us to do. If a lot of our friends are raving about a new restaurant or a new piece of software, we can feel fairly certain that we'll like it too. So we can move forward and get off the sidelines where we're hesitant and get into the game. And then once you've got those two phases under control, then there's the question of, even if people have reduced their uncertainty, even if they like and feel a relationship with a communicator, that doesn't always translate into action. Sometimes we need a spur to get us to take that step, even though we think we know what's the best thing. I know the best thing to do is for me to go to the gym on a regular basis and work out before I go start my work day. But that doesn't always get me there. Just knowing that and being sure that that's what the authorities, experts have to say, and that I like my trainer and so on. No, sometimes I'm hesitant. So there are two factors that really stimulate, let me say it this way, mobilize people into action. One is scarcity, where the opportunity to take that step is rare, scarce, or dwindling in availability. That will get us moving. That will get us stepping forward to seize that opportunity. The other is commitment and consistency, where if I can be convinced that, look, you've already made a commitment to this idea or proposal, this set of values that you have developed over the years, you've made a commitment to those. And what I'm suggesting to you, this communicator might say to me, is entirely consistent with what you already value. Oh, that will get me to take that step forward. So those are the three stages, the three arenas, and the three goals that communicators often have. And what we have to do is recognize where we are in that series of steps and use the principles that are most appropriate for each.
Love it. Love that answer. And again, it really adds so much nuance to what many people are aware of the principles, obviously, but I love the way that's presented, and great job to Dr.
Neidert, Dr. Gregory Neidert. In fact, I was delivering a talk in the Netherlands, and there was somebody in the audience. We had a Q&A period, and he raised his hand. He said, we have an online company. We have a site. We sell a particular form of nutritional product. And when we first started out, the principles of social proof and authority were just doing great work for us. Those were the things that were getting the most evidence of an effect from our subscribers, from the members of our network. But they've fallen off now, and I don't understand why. Well, by now those people aren't uncertain anymore of what they should do, but they're probably not spurred into action to the extent. So I suggested that they think about using appeals that say, you have done this in the past, it was successful for you. Don't you think it's wise for you to do this? And also have some promotions that say, we have this as a special, and there are only so many available of these opportunities at this price. And all of a sudden he wrote me, he said, now that's what worked at that stage. So you really have to think through what your goal is with regard to each of the people that you're trying to, or each of the types of people that you're trying to move in your direction.
Love it. So one of the things I heard you talk about recently, Bob, and this is something I know that has been addressed in your new book, is how the impact of these principles work nowadays in the modern world. And I think you were quoting a study or something along the lines of 29 different factors, and the 6 principles or 7 were right up there. And I think scarcity was like number 1, but also was number 4. Could you just elaborate a bit on that? Because I found that fascinating.
It was a study of 6,700 e-commerce websites. And they looked at the A/B tests that the people involved in those websites had performed, and looked at the rate of conversion from prospect to customer that occurred with each of the tests. And they did look at 29 separate factors of the website that would be that were manipulated or varied through the 6,700 of them, and they rated the ones that were most successful. Now, you were right to say that the 6 principles of influence, at least the ones that we were talking about at that time, before the new book, where we've got a 7th one, outdistanced all of the other kinds of features, like technological features, search functions within the website, or badging of certain kinds of products or models that were available, or even economic factors like free shipping. None of those were as successful as the 6 principles. But even within those 6 principles, there were differences. So the one at the top was scarcity in terms of limited number of items. Right? So there are only so many items at this price available, for example. Right? You could say, and then we won't be able to sell those anymore. That's the kind of thing that had the most effect of all 29 of the factors. The second principle was social proof. The idea that if you showed people that a lot of people were seizing a particular choice or option, or there was a trend in that direction, that was next as effective. And let me just say, we've done some research ourselves on trends. And if you were to say, for example, that you have now gotten to the point of, let's say, 40% of the market share in your arena, right? If you were to say that to people, well, they don't quite know what to do with that. If you say to them, last year, it was 20% of the market share. Now you've got a difference between the two. But people don't always know how differences are going to proceed. Will it stay like that? But if you tell them 2 years ago it was 20%, last year it was 30%, this year it's 40%, now you've given them a trend. And what trends give you is future social proof, because people project the direction, the function of that trend into the future. They do it with 3 data points. They won't do it with 2, and certainly don't do it with 1. So whenever you are offering information, don't forget to give them the history of your success, because they will project that into the future, and you will now have something we never talked about before. I never talked about it before. Future social proof going for you.
Love it, love it. And in that study as well, there was, as you mentioned, there was scarcity of number. Then I think there was it reciprocity, or was it?
No, the next was scarcity of time, limited time appeals. So there are only so many days until you can no longer get this product or get this product at this price. That also, a lot of people jumped because of scarcity. It prods people off the fence and gets them moving. But the reason it wasn't as effective as limited number is that it didn't have competition for the scarce opportunity. You could get that product or service on the website anytime within the week or month that it was available. It wasn't that it was going to be gone because some other person online would snatch it up, the way that is the case for limited number items, right? In the Netherlands, there's a online booking site called Booking.com. They do reservations for um, hotels and plane uh, tickets and vacations and so on. Well, they were, when they first started, uh, casting about for various kinds of strategies that would work. And they began to include in the message that you get when you go on the site and you, let's say, click to a particular hotel and a particular kind of room, they started including how many rooms were available at that price, right? Only 3 rooms available, something like that. And then they included, and X number of people are looking at this site right now. That caused the customer service unit to send a message to the technology unit saying something's wrong, the website is broken, it's broken down, there's a glitch because we've gotten so many purchases in the last hour that it can't be true. It
Wow.
was true. It wasn't a broken system,
Uh-huh.
it was the power of scarcity plus competition. So that's why limited numbers at the top, limited time offers are also successful, but not as successful.
Brilliant. No, fantastic. Um, and so I want to get to next the seventh principle, Bob, because when I read Persuasion, I don't know, back 2016 or so when it came out, I remember being very excited. Um, and I know in Unity, and again, ask you to elaborate, but I know Unity is generally speaking meaning two things: either collaborating or part of a sort of a group, an in-group with them. Uh,
Yes.
from a Unity point of view, could you explain a bit more about it, but also um, if you could discern the difference between the similarity in the liking principle versus unity, because I know that's something that there's similarities, but you put it. There was some turn of phrase you use where you put it brilliantly. The difference between the two. I'd love to hear about unity and the difference with that.
Yes, of course, the liking principle says we prefer to work with people we like, and one thing that causes us to like other people is similarities of one sort or another. Um, and so, but those similarities that we're talking about there are commonalities in preferences or styles or the kind of food you like or the kind of music you like, these kinds of preferences and commonalities. Unity is about commonality of membership, of being of another individual, being one of that a group with that individual. And if a communicator can arrange for us to see him or her as a member in a group that we use to define ourselves, right? All barriers to influence come down. We just are significantly more likely to trust that person, to believe that person, to want to cooperate with that person, and to want to say yes to that person. Right? So it's about being having a common membership or common partnership with this individual. All right. That's what it is. So, for example, there was a study done that I like to talk about on a college campus. The researchers took a young woman about college age, had her stand at a busy intersection of paths on campus, and ask students who were walking by to contribute to a legitimate charity. She had a container, and she was getting some contributions. But if she added one sentence to her request, she more than doubled contributions. The sentence was, I'm a student here too. I'm I'm of you. I'm not just like you. I'm of you, and now 250% greater contributions with that one sentence, that one more breath that she needed to take to utter that sentence. It sounds like it's a small thing, but that's what consistently amazes me about these principles, is how small the changes can be that we can employ in the way that we make a request or proposal or recommendation and produce very large scale differences, because those small changes engage big psychological tendencies in us, like favoring people we feel are of us. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I love that study. I love that study. I think it's wonderful, and wonderful in its ability to explain that principle really clearly. I've one other sort of more nuanced question on it, if you don't mind, Bob, and that's so one of the things I read a lot of research about in terms of the in-group bias, right? So the release of, let's say, oxytocin makes you feel closer to the group that you're with, but also makes you feel further away from a group that you're not with.
Right.
Let's say you're in a negotiation, you're bonding well with regards to the internal stakeholders. Is it the right idea that says that, like, let's say you build a sense of unity with the people you're working with, when you go to deal with, let's say, an outgroup, someone who necessarily comes from another organization but you need to work with, then again you just pivot and you adapt the unity to them. You find the same commonalities, the overall common purpose, any sort of identity similarities
Right.
as well.
And that's the thing really to be on the lookout for. Um, Not just, oh, we both like strawberry ice cream. No, no, it's something. Oh, we're we're both runners. Oh, I'm a runner. You're a runner. Oh, we're both from this part of the country, or this we went to the same school, or we had the same major in college. I mean, these unifying kinds of commonalities, those are the things that become extraordinarily powerful. Um, yeah. And
Could
region, you know, commonality of place is one of those things that's remarkably powerful. So where we can find that we both lived in the same city for a while, or we both grew up in the same region or area, uh, and or we we've both vacationed in a place and want to go back and live there someday. I mean, all of those things that are associated with commonality of place are very powerful.
on that, Robert, your my favorite story you've ever told. I would love you to share it with us. It's from Persuasion. I heard you tell it live at the Moment Maker workshop, and it's about the Jewish rabbi. Would you share it with the listeners? Because I just think it's such a wonderful way of explaining the power of unity.
This situation that you're describing occurred in the years around the Second World War, when, of course, the Nazi domination of parts of Europe led to the persecution of the Jewish populations there. And it turns out that once Pearl Harbor occurred in December of 1941, Japan became a wartime ally of the Nazi regime. And what uh, Hitler did was to send an envoy to Japan to try to convince the Japanese that there were certain Jewish communities in Japanese held territory, specifically in Kobe and also in Shanghai, that Japan controlled at that point. And this envoy, his name was the Butcher of Warsaw, a guy named Josef Meisner. And he tried to convince the Japanese to treat them the way the Nazis were treating Jews in Europe. Well, to the Japanese credit, they said, well, let's hear from the other side. So they asked the Jewish communities to send a couple of rabbis to make the case for why they should be saved. Uh, and and there were two rabbis who were sent. One was a scholar who knew everything about the Talmud and the Torah and so on. The other was known as a psychologist in his community. You would always go to this older gentleman who understood human interactions and would solve relationship problems or family problems for people by understanding human dynamics. So they sent these two guys, and they stood in front of this tribunal of Japanese military, and the head officer said, "Okay, let's get right to the questions we have to ask you because we've got a long day. I've got two questions. First, why do our allies, the Nazis, hate you so much? And the second was, why should we take your side against our wartime partners, our wartime allies?" And of course, the scholar was dumbfounded by this. The questions had such scope. It had to do with history and economics and prejudice and all kinds of issues that were too broad to just lecture this tribunal about. But the psychologist rabbi, the older gentleman, said, what to me may be the single most effective reply to a question in terms of changing people's minds that I've ever heard. He said, the answer to both of these questions is the first being why they hate us so much and why you should take our side, right, is that we are Asian like you, which told them, wait a minute, yes, we're Asian, and they hate you because you're Asian? Because you're not one of the superior, race? And you should protect us because we are of you in a permanent, in a durable sense, not a temporary wartime alliance. We are of you. You are of us. 45 minutes later, they were leaving and had been promised, go back to your people, tell them they will not be harmed under our watch. And so it was.
Amazing. I never get tired of listening to that story, Bob. Thank you so much for sharing again. So I suppose on with the new book. In it, one of the coolest things that I've seen is in there is that you've got really like specific from a linguistic point of view, as in you've provided some wonderful examples of how to literally phrase.
Yes.
In order to be able to use some of the principles, social proof, reciprocity, whatnot. I'd love you to give some examples of this. And obviously, anyone who has any interest in psychology should be getting this book today. But since this will be out whenever it's out. But I'd love you to share just some of the most important, like great examples you have about the language of persuasion.
We can start with reciprocity. And, you're often in a situation in which, and of course, the rule for reciprocity says people want to give back to you if you have first given to them. And very often we get thanked by someone we have gone out of our way to assist in some way or another. Really, we go above and beyond the call of duty and help this person out. And we hear them say to us, thank you for that. That was special. We don't often get that from our clients or our customers or our vendors or our partners. That was above and beyond. Thank you. And very often what we say is a mistake in return. What we say is, oh, don't think anything of it. I was just glad to do it because, it's what we do. I would have done it for anybody. Don't think a thing of it. That's exactly the wrong thing to say. You earned that moment. You did do that. You don't want to dismiss it by slapping it out the window with the back of your hand, So here's what I would recommend saying. If this is a long-standing friend or colleague or customer, right? Here's what you can honestly say. Of course, I was glad to do it. It's what long-term friends, customers, whatever it's what long-term partners do for one another. You put it on the map. You don't sweep it away and diminish it or minimize it. Yes, but always remember the addendum, for one another, so that everyone is aware that this is something that is part of the long and honored system of exchange. This is what we do for one another. When you need something in the future, that person is going to be readied to say yes. Now, suppose it isn't somebody you've dealt with before. Maybe it's a first-time exchange, but you've really gone out of your way to help this person. And once again, he or she says, "Thank you so much." Here's what I'd suggest under those circumstances. You say, "Of course, I know if the situation were ever reversed, you'd do the same for me." Again, put it on the map. Don't let it dissipate. And I've heard some people, after I've given lectures on this, and then they write to me and they're proud of how they used it, and they've used it wrong. They've said, "Oh, sure, I was glad to help. I know that if the situation had been reversed, you would have done the same for me." In other words, they're putting the favor in the past, where you'll never be able to go. No. Specifically say, if the situation were ever to be reversed, I know you'd do the same for me. Now, once again, it's waiting there for a time when you might need a special favor in return. You'll get it.
Wow, love it. And again, there's other examples I can think of. There's like switching around in a call center. Operators are standing by. Please call, and you swap or switch that into something along the lines of, "If operators are busy, please try again." And again, emphasizing the social proof, emphasizing the scarcity, little nuances like that. I love. There's one other question in terms of influence in general that I'd love to ask Bob about contrast. So in the book, contrast is the initial phenomenon. I always initially and then when I went to the training, I understood more. But contrast, I was trying to understand why it wasn't one of the principles, because I love the example that you give, or that is given about the advertising executive helping the homeless person, with the it's like, "I'm blind," and it's like, if you want to share that actually, so that
Yeah. So contrast has to do with the fact that if two ideas are presented one after another in succession, and they're fairly different from one another, we perceive them as more different than they actually are. So, for example, if I were to lift a light object, this piece of paper here, and then you asked me to lift a heavier object, let's say a paperweight. The paperweight would feel heavier than if I hadn't asked you to first lift the paper, because by contrast, it seems heavier than it actually is. And so this is the sort of thing that we can use. What is that? What's the situation that you wanted me to explicate with the contrast principle?
Well, it's pretty much the why contrast wasn't, one of the six principles initially, and how it kind of its relationship to them in that way. Because I love, I love all six.
Yeah,
I know now all seven, but I just thought contrast is something I was always curious as to
yeah.
how it fits with the rest.
Contrast is a phenomenon, but it exists in every situation, right? So it is there. You can always contrast something against something else. And we often make the mistake of failing to do that. Um, so, uh, for example, um, if I were to show you this bottle of 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 water, of mineral water, and give you the price of it. Let's say it's $1.95 for this bottle of water. Okay. If I first tell you the distance to the sun, if I first mention the distance to the sun, the price of this now seems less expensive as a consequence. Right? So you see it all around you. In this particular case that you were talking about, it involved a situation where there was a man named Rosser Reeves, a 1950s era advertising executive. In fact, it's said that the television program Mad Men, one of the principal characters was patterned after this famous guy, Rosser Reeves, who was the first one to really use human psychology in systematic ways in the advertising process. And there's a story that's told by a friend of his that the two of them were walking. He was located on Madison Avenue. They're walking to lunch through a park. It was a beautiful spring day. The flowers were blooming. The trees were budding, and they came across um, a panhandler essentially, who was asking for contributions. He was sitting in a spot with a hat in front of him, with a sign that said, "I am blind." Right? And um, they walked by. There were a few coins in his hat, but not enough to really make a difference for that man. And uh, Reeves stopped his friend and said, "Wait a minute, I'm going to help this guy." Right? And what he did was reach into his pocket. His friend thought he was going to get his wallet out and give him some money. Instead, he reached in and he got a pen, right? And he wrote 3 words on the sign, right? And then put it back in front of the hat. Right? And suddenly, people started walking by, looking at the sign and doing a double take and scratching their head and looking up at the sky and saying, yeah, and then giving him some money, reaching into pockets, reaching into purses, right? So what were the 3 words? What did he say on the sign? He wrote at the top of the sign, "Before I am blind, it's springtime and I am blind." What he did was to contrast every person's experience in spring in Central Park, right? They had all of this glorious, the sights and sounds and smells of springtime, and this man didn't, right? And he contrasted the wealth that these people had against the poverty of experience that the blind man didn't get. Right? And so to compensate, they tried to redistribute the wealth to some degree anyway by giving him some money to compensate for that contrast between the two of them. Yeah.
Fantastic. No, wonderful, Bob. Really appreciate sharing that. I'll just a couple more questions on the thing, and then I have a quick fire round where I just ask like one sentence answers on something.
Sure.
Okay. Another thing that is in the new book is you have a great approach when it comes to, instead of asking for someone's opinion, there's something else you can do that gets way
Right.
better results.
Here's another example of what you were pointing to before, and that is changing a single word, telling people what to say specifically to harness one of these principles. And in this case, it's the principle of unity. A lot of times when we have an idea for a new initiative at work, or a new plan or a product, whatever it could be, and we want to take it up the ladder, we want to get buy-in from our fellow contemporaries, so that we can point to the social proof. All of these people think that it's a good idea, and we can tell our boss that. Well, when we try to get that buy-in, which is also the case, by the way, when we do co-creation for products and services, where we try to get our customers to join us in fashioning a new model of an existing product, or a new feature, or even a new product. We try to get them to join us in buying into this idea. And what we typically do is to ask for their feedback on, let's say, a blueprint or an outline of our idea. And we want them to really be on our side with it. That's exactly what we should do, ask for their feedback. But we should not do what we normally say to them in asking for their feedback, which is to say, I would really appreciate your opinion on this. Could you give me your opinion on this? Because when you ask for someone's opinion, you get a critic. People take a half step back from you psychologically, and they go into themselves, and they consider the pros and cons of your idea, kind of like a representative of everybody else who might be exposed to your idea. And there's your idea, you and your idea over here, and they're representing everybody else's reaction, what might be to this idea. Okay, so it's a mistake. Instead, if you don't say, can you give me your opinion on this, you ask for that person's advice on this idea. They take a half step towards you psychologically. They partner with you on this idea. And now, literally, they feel more connected to it. And the research shows that if you ask for someone's advice on an idea versus opinion, you get significantly more favorable views after you ask for advice. You've asked for somebody to be your partner on this. Instead of standing here, against you and your idea with everybody else, they're now over there with you, envisioning you and your idea and their advice against everybody else's ideas or reaction to it. And the consequence is that you can, with one word, flip things around in a significant way.
Fantastic. And there's one other question just on the new book. There was one suggestion you had around how to get your partner to make changes. And I know there's a lot of people in relationships right now that are listening and going, so there's a strategy I could use to make it more likely that that my partner will make changes in their life. I certainly know my own girlfriend would want the answer to this question. So what is it? Can I ask?
Well, it's also an instantiation of the unity principle. So if you are, let's say you have an issue and you want your partner to make a change on it, and it's just something you haven't been able to do in the past. There was a study that showed that if one of you says, look, you better change or else I'll have to do something you don't like, not only doesn't that work, it actually pushes people further away. There's another strategy that also doesn't work. It's to say, my idea, my view is the more reasonable, logical, rational way to be. You're just not understanding things. People don't move further away, but they laugh at you for that. Oh, sure, you have the smarter idea. No, so that doesn't work. But there's one thing that works. It's to say, you know, we've been together for X number of months now, whatever it is. I really wish you would do this for me. Or to simply use the pronouns we, our, and us in making your appeal. And what you've done is to bring to consciousness now the fact that you are a unit, that you do have a partnership. And the features of partnership then take over. And that's the only strategy of those three that produce significant change in the direction of the other partner's request.
Brilliant. Thank you, Bob. That's wonderful. Before I get to the quick fire round, just want to say to everybody, Bob's new book, it's out now. It's Influence. It's a revised edition. You'll find a link in the show notes to this and also a link to Bob's website as well. It is a must-have. If you're in the field of psychology, if you're interested in influence, if you're in sales, if you're in business, you have to get this book. There's 200 plus pages of extra information, some amazing studies on reciprocity, amazing stuff on social proof to do with work that was done in McDonald's and work that was done in different restaurants and work that was done all across different areas and different spheres. So if you want to be successful, more successful in business, is the number one recommendation of a book. You have to get your hands in it. Again, I can't be enthusiastic enough about it. Bob, before we wrap up, I wanted to finish with questions that I ask all of our guests. First of all, your favorite movie or actor?
It's an old one. It's a mad, 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 mad world. Right? From back in the 70s, I think. I used to watch that every Christmas holiday just because it's so funny. It has some of the greatest comedians of the early days of television and movies in it. And I watch it every time I can.
Love it. Fantastic. Favorite TV show?
I would say Seinfeld.
That's a classic.
Yeah, I mean, it was just so clever, so droll. I couldn't get enough of it.
Brilliant. Favorite musician?
Jimi Hendrix.
Brilliant. Yeah, legend. Favorite book or author? Or both?
Well, right now, Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Absolutely, mine too. And he's got a new book coming out as well, Noise,
Yes.
with Kat Sunstein. So that's what we're looking out for. If you could have any superpower, Robert, what would it be?
Compassion. No, let me say that, not compassion, mind reading.
Mind reading, which allows you to have more compassion. If you could travel to the past or the future, when would you go? Why?
Where would I go in the past or the future? I would definitely go, not way into the future, but about 20 years into the future, because I think we're on the cusp of some forms of change because of genetic engineering, right? That we are going to see in the next 20 years advances that are going to change us as a species. We're going to be able to get various kinds of genetic engineering, right, that will make us different than we have ever been before in ways I hope will be favorable and more positive and pro-social.
Love it. And just a couple more. Favorite place on earth?
Barcelona.
Barcelona. Love it. Fantastic. And lastly, Bob, if you could put one message out there, one message on a billboard to the world to try to get them to, I don't know, to share your message for humanity, what would it be, do you think?
Be generous first, because if you go into a situation where you don't know very many people and you think the best of them that to expect from them, that allows you to be generous. And three things happen. One, they like you for that generosity. Second, by virtue of reciprocity, they're generous to you. And third, as a result of being generous to you, they've become a partner with you. They've made a commitment to you as a partner. So you've now got commitment, and they will be consistent with that commitment to you on into the future.
Brilliant. Well, Bob, on that note, I want to say a big thank you for your generosity for this podcast, but also for your generosity with all the great work that you've done. You made a huge difference in so many people's lives, and you're going to continue to do so with this book and many books beyond. And so it's been a real pleasure for me to talk to you finally and to, and interview you on
Yeah.
this podcast. And I wish you best of luck with the book. Everybody, if you're listening to this, please go ahead and get it. I promise you, you will thank me afterwards. Thanks so much, Bob. And yeah, best of luck. I look forward to the next time.
Thank you. And I very much enjoyed the chance to interact with you.